if I may say so very politely, that the economy will be cashless, terrorist funding will be stopped, the black money will be arrested, and the timings that was declared by the government of India was also proved to be inaccurate for a normal supply of currency. So far as Bank Employees Federation of India is concerned, from the very beginning, from the word go, from the very moment it was announced, we came to a conclusion and very loudly told that this is all wrong, and the timings that was declared for the currency to be normalized, that was also not possible, that we all know. Now, after 9 years also, we don't think that the impact which was made, the country could be recovered. We don't think so. Particularly as economy, the main thrust of the workers, particularly the unorganized sector workers, informal workers, and we saw what happened when demonetization came up. And we also, during the period of time, we observed unemployment highest in the last 45, 50 years. And still the country is dealing with unemployment, precarious employment, joblessness is continuing. And so far as banking sector is concerned, though it was told that the economy will be cashless, but we all know that the currency that is now being available in the market is more than 2016. Secondly, so far as black money is concerned, almost 99.8% currency back to the bank branches. So black money is also continuing, that we all know. Black money, nobody keep in cash. So in this situation, what has happened? That in the name of cashless economy, it is the fintech companies who has given a free passage to the India's financial sector. Now we all know that the transaction of the country is turning to be paperless. We all coming across unified payment interface UPI, which is more than 90% of transaction. As far as Reserve Bank's data is concerned, it is only 0.2% that transaction is being undertaken by checks. 0.2%, not even 1%. And after unified payment interface, it is unified recovery interface, unified lending interface, without involvement of people, bank clerks, banks officers. All are being done through system. And mostly the works are being outsourced. It is outsourced agencies. Number of employees is being reduced, permanent employees. Now, temporary employees are on the rise in different forms. I'm not going into that. Now, secondly, after so many years, after the merger of the banks in 2017, associate banks were merged with State Bank of India. In 2019, 2 banks were merged with Bank of Baroda. And in 2020, 10 public sector banks were merged into 4, thereby reducing the number of 6. Now, public sector banks are 12 in the country. 6 are large banks by way of merger and acquisition, and 6 are standalone banks. Now, again, another set of merger is being discussed in the country. Secondly, Finance Minister 2 days ago has told that privatization will not affect financial inclusion or country's development. So these are the things, these are narratives that is coming in front of the bank employees. But so far as the demonetization is concerned, we cannot forget this, that it happened 9 years ago. No, because demonetization was a political project. It is not just a simple decision. A project to declare a war against this working class. And working class means more than 94% are unorganized sector workers without any social security, without any minimum wages. So this was a war against this unorganized sector workers. So our today's discussion, of course, is to recollect the impact of the decision, and secondly, as because it was a policy making, the neoliberal policy is on the rise in the country. So today, after this NDA government, after this 11 years since 2014, the policies are out and out anti-working class policy. That we have to keep in mind. So today we are going to recollect our experience since 2016 and relating to this situation and our role in the days to come. That is the role of the working class. We are part of this one. So today's discussion is very important for us because we all know that even this attack on the working class and the aggressive pursuit of neoliberal economic policy, there is no time to sit back. We have to be on the move. We have to fight our ways ahead. So today's discussion will definitely encourage us, enrich us in tomorrow's fight. So today's meeting will be conducted by our national president, Comrade Anil. So without taking much more time, I will hand over to Comrade Anil, our national president, to conduct. Over to Comrade.
Yes, Comrade. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening to you all. As explained by our General Secretary, today we are meeting in this webinar, being the 9th anniversary of demonetization. History, that is, now that demonetization is an history. I'm not taking much time about that. But anyhow, you may be remembering, today we have planned to start our meeting at 8 o'clock. It was at 8 p.m. on 2016, November 8, that the Prime Minister announced the sudden demonetization of 500 and 1,000 notes. What happened in the banking sector, we all know. Next day, 9th, it was declared holiday, and after the 9th, that is on 10th, when the branches were opened, actually it was heavy flooded with common customers. Then what service, how the service was given to them by the public sector bank employees, all of us know. See, that was on the first day, or that is on the 10th only, the common people came to know about the 2000 currency note, 2000 valued currency note, which was issued by Reserve Bank of India. It was given to common people on 10th of November, 2016. That also you may be remembering, at that day, on 10th, they were allowed to encash only 4,000 rupees. See, on 7th, a common man in India who is having 500 and 1,000 notes, currency notes with them, it became a piece of paper the very next day, after 8 p.m. when Prime Minister announced the demonetization. How it affected the common people? I'm not taking much time. But now 9 years it has passed. What is the impact it has created to the economy of our country? As mentioned by Comrade Debashish, you may be knowing what all things are happening now in banking sector. Now recently many things are coming. See, after that tariff which was being brought by Trump in America, in the United States. See, United States, that is the nation. You may be knowing, at the time when Reagan was there in the power and Thatcher was there in Britain, at that time only this neoliberal economic policy, it started, and the opening up of all the nations, it started at that time. Now this new tariff and everything introduced by Trump, how these neoliberal policies are going, how they are this nation, this America is considering that. I want to say is, recently you may be knowing, there were reports that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when the ministry officials, when they went to Washington to discuss about this tariff, one of the assurance given to the officials in states, United States, was that the FDI in public sector bank, it will be increased to 49%. Now it is 20%. It will be increased to 49%. That assurance was given in Washington. And recently, what has happened in New York, that is also with us. I'm not taking much time. Who has been elected as the mayor of that New York. Everything is there with us. Now, 49% FDI, it has been, they are going to make changes in law that is being enacted in Parliament. They are going to make changes there. Not only that, along with that, another decision came that in State Bank of India, the highest position, that is they have taken a decision to appoint private people working in private entities, working in private sector banks, private sector financial institutions. See, soon after that, in Canara Bank also, such a decision was taken. And after that, we are getting some reports that after that banking manthan, which has been conducted, after that, some reports are coming that now there are only 12 public sector banks. The number of the public sector banks, it is also going to be decreased, and another merger is coming. Sometimes it may be only 3 banks. Anyhow, yesterday, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, she has also, in a deliberation, she has also admitted that they are planning. And they have already, DFS has discussed with Reserve Bank of India regarding this merger and everything. Not only that, on 4th, the same finance minister had some discussion with some students at that time regarding privatization of public sector banks. It was also clearly mentioned. What I want to say is, see, after this demonetization, I am very happy. I am very as mentioned by Comrade Dabashish, from the very next day, that very next moment itself, Bank Employees Federation of India, we went to common people and explained to them about what will happen, what will be the future of our economy, what will be the impact of demonetization. Everything we started explaining to them from the very next moment of this demonetization itself. I think that it is the one and only organization in banking sector which came out with against demonetization the very next day or the very next days, came out with the demonetization, its ill effects. Not only that, for the past 9 years, we may be remembering, but on November 8th of all the years, on the past 9 years, Bank Employees Federation of India used to conduct some programs. We used to go to common people and explain to them about the impact of this demonetization in the economy. At the same time, we also explain to them what all things are happening in our economy after in these 9 years. Today, on this 9th year of, that is the 9th anniversary of demonetization, since you know that it is an holiday as far as bank employees are considered. Even though it is a holiday, in many parts of the country, our people, our members, they are conducting many programs. Today also many programs it has been conducted. And anyhow, today we have discussed, we have decided to conduct a national webinar. And really we are very much happy and we are very much proud that renowned economist Dr. Venkatesh Atreya is now with us. So I am not taking much time. The subject which he is going to speak, that subject is demonetization. We have clearly mentioned that it is a war against the poor and unorganized. Along with that, what are things are happening in the economy, everything, I think we will get a very clear picture after the deliberation of Dr. Venkatesh Atreya. Anyhow, once again, on behalf of Bank Employees Federation of India, I welcome Comrade Venkatesh Atreya to this webinar and also request him to kindly speak on the subject. Over to you, Dr. Venkatesh Atreya. Okay, sir. Okay, sir, please unmute, sir. Please unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Now we can hear. Now we can hear. Okay.
First of all,
okay,
I'd like to thank the Bank Employees Federation of India and the comrade who just gave us a brief overview of what happened at that time. I've been in touch with comrade in the banking industry for a long time, and as an economist, I admire the commitment with which the Bank Employees Federation of India is addressing issues that pertain not only to the banking industry, but the implications of those policies and processes for ordinary working people. I think it must be a very rare phenomenon that a trade union takes on this responsibility of educating the public on an important issue like demonetization, but not just demonetization, also the impact of policies of the government of India from time to time. What does it mean for ordinary working people as opposed to what the media would like us to believe? I want to go back to that date on November 8th, 2016. And I remember being interviewed shortly thereafter by Relief Mail correspondent. And I said at that time that this was actually, at that time, the popular word was precision strike, right? A very militant, boastful language of the government. And I said, this demonetization is a precision strike against the poor of this country. You may recall that the Prime Minister at that time made 4 claims on why demonetization was welcome and necessary and what benefits it would bring. He said, first of all, it will eliminate black money, it will eliminate counterfeit currency, it will end terrorism, and it will end corruption. These are extraordinary claims for the government to make. As it turned out, oh, I think something else. Sorry. Yeah, these are extraordinary claims. In fact, at that time I said that there was the notion that black wealth in this country, that is, wealth that had been obtained, accumulated, but on which no taxes had been paid, could easily be the notion that it could be done by, it could be removed or stopped or brought out by declaring currency notes of certain denominations as being no longer legal tender was a very foolish idea. And this has been said not only by me, but by many economists, even neoliberal economists like Dr. Ram Rajan did not approve of the idea of demonetization. It's logically quite simple that how do you assume, how do you claim that demonetization will eliminate black money? Government of India's own earlier studies had shown that people hold wealth that has escaped taxation in various forms. They don't hold it only as currency. In fact, the amount of wealth that has escaped taxation, of that hardly 5 to 6% is held in the form of currency. So at best, demonetization could impact that 5-6%. And we saw very quickly that even that was not happening because most of the money that had been, in this manner targeted, ultimately all the money came back to the banking system. You may remember that at that time the value of 500,000 rupee notes in circulation was roughly about 15.44 lakh crores, and all of that really came back. But in fact, what the government did by that act of demonetization was to impound and suddenly render invalid 86% of the country's money supply. This can be devastating for any economy, and it'll actually make transactions on a daily basis impossible, especially in a country like India, where the large majority of transactions take place in currency and not in other instruments of payment. And this is not something unknown. As I said, the government of India had gone into the question, they had discussed this question of black money, and they had explicitly rejected the idea of demonetization at that time as a device to address the issue of black wealth. This was a kind of a diversion, essentially, from other important issues that the Indian economy faced. And soon enough, we saw that demonetization as a measure of targeting black wealth had not succeeded at all. Unfortunately, in the process, you will recall that more than 100 people lost their lives. Just people in queues waiting to draw money from the accounts, overworked bank employees and officers who could not deal with the enormous pressure that demonetization put on the bank employees and officers, and so on. And many other those. It's a bit long. It's about almost 10 years ago, so you may not remember all the tragic events that unfolded in the lives of many people following demonetization. But what I want to say is that, I think we, earlier remarks by speakers here today have already indicated to us the consequences of demonetization and how the Bank Employees Federation of India addressed that issue from then until now. So what I will do is really continue with a review of the policies of the government of India for the last 10 years now. And I'll go back and start with the claims that the Prime Minister made at that time, which is about one is that it will eliminate black money, second that it will eliminate counterfeit currency, and third that it will eliminate terrorism, and fourth that it will eliminate corruption. These are the claims that are being made. They were absurd claims, and I'm sure the person making those claims knew that they were absurd, because obviously you don't eliminate when hardly 5 to 6% of black wealth is held as currency. You don't eliminate black wealth by simply declaring notes of certain denominations invalid or illegal, no longer legal tender. Secondly, the issue of counterfeit currency. Studies of the government of India had shown that the counterfeit currency in circulation in value terms was a very, very minuscule fraction of the total amount of money in circulation. It wasn't really the issue at all, and it will get handled in the routine course of transactions. The claim that this would stop terrorism was, of course, absurd, as evidenced by many acts of terrorism that have followed since 2014. It will be very difficult for the government of India now to claim that post 2016, November 8, there has been no terrorist events in this country. They themselves have claimed great success in countering terrorism. So obviously, terrorism will continue to rear its head from time to time. And I don't want to go into those events which have, had difficult consequences for our country and for many participants in the armed forces and so on. But clearly, terrorism has not ended. If anything, it continues to this day to be an important issue for the government to deal with. How they deal with it is a different matter. I'm not going into that now. Likewise, the claim that demonetization would eliminate corruption is an extraordinary statement, because in an economy driven by private profit, every transaction is an opportunity to make gains. And so as long as that incentive, that opportunity exists, the presumption that rendering notes of a certain denomination illegal will stop that is, of course, utterly illogical. So, it's clear that the Prime Minister must have been aware of that when he was saying it. So all the four claims he made, because we know now that black wealth is held in an enormous variety of assets. There can be gold, there can be real estate, there can be transactions in foreign shores and so on. So, I don't think the Prime Minister was unaware of the fact that many of the statements he was making in defense of demonetization were utterly untenable. But he made them nonetheless. It's a political statement. In fact, the political character of the move, if you go back and remember what was happening at that time, is brought out by a statement the Prime Minister made. Remember that this was November 8th, and a short while later, elections in UP were going to happen. The Prime Minister made a very significant statement. He said that why are the opposition parties making a lot of noise and shouting about demonetization? He said, as an explanation, that they were not prepared for it, for demonetization, implying, of course, that the ruling party was prepared for it. They had prepared for this measure that was to come and had taken appropriate actions prior to the announcement of the rendering legal tender of 500,000 rupee notes no longer valid. So, clearly this had something to do with the possibly, I'm saying speculatively, that this had probably something to do with the war chest they had to get ready for the UP elections. That's one possibility. There are other possibilities. In any event, the Prime Minister must have known that the consequences of demonetization are quite different from what they claimed it to be. Now, that's one important episode. If I recall those days, it's as the previous speakers have said, these were very difficult times, not just for the bank employees and officers, but for the general public and for the country as a whole. And it led to a sharp decline in the path of economic growth. More specifically, it affected the informal sector massively. I recall having many conversations with, ordinary individuals being self-employed and doing their own limited economic activity. I remember one taxi driver who said, "Sir, I had some 30,000 rupees with me in 500 rupee notes, but since I was always on the road doing my work, I couldn't even go to the bank and exchange them within the time limit that was stipulated." So this is a big amount for a small taxi driver. See, and like that, there must be people across the country who suffered irrevocable losses on account of the drastic measure of the government of India on November 8th, 2016. But let's go forward. I mean, we have talked about demonetization. We are all aware of what happened immediately thereafter and how it affected ordinary working people of India and also how it affected the informal sector. For example, farmers who had just sold the crops were stuck with 500,000 rupee notes, which they could not possibly use to buy inputs for the next season. Or if you had not sold your crops, then people who were going to buy it from you would only offer you those large denomination notes and you couldn't take them, so you couldn't sell your output. So farmers, other commodity producers, traders, all of these people experienced difficulty in carrying out routine economic transactions day after day, and that's a huge blow for their activity. And in fact, demonetization in that sense had a devastating impact on agriculture in that year as well, apart from other parts of the economy. But let's move on. And that's, we've talked about it. We are all aware of its implications. But I want to pursue something else, which is that after the demonetization episode, did the economy either recover or go at an accelerated pace of growth? No, because, I want to remind you that while demonetization was the event that took place on November 8th, 2016, within a few months, we had the introduction of the GST in Parliament. In fact, there was a celebration of the 30th of June, 1st of July, that night, as a second Independence Day, and so on. A lot of hype was there in the media, and this was to announce the arrival of the goods and services tax, which is imposed on the country on that day. And this was something that was going to be a second very big shock to the economy and in general, and in particular to the informal sector, small businessmen, small farmers, ordinary merchants, ordinary employees and working people, because there are certain features of the GST that need to be highlighted, contrary to the impression given by supporters of the government. First of all, the GST is an indirect tax. It's a tax on goods and services, and it falls uniformly at the same rate on the rich and the poor. So, in fact, it hurts the poor far more than it does the rich. Following up on demonetization and its negative impact on employment and economic growth, this GST was another devastating blow. In other words, what I'm saying is within the space of 1 year, the government of India had put in two major measures which would destabilize the economy for quite some time to come. Prior to that, since the time they took office in 2014, and before demonetization, there was about a year and a half or two that transpired in between. Internationally, oil prices fell sharply, but this decline in oil prices was not the relief that it should have afforded, did not reach the people because the government of India kept the oil prices at a higher level and pocketed the gains that came from international decline in oil prices. That almost went unnoticed, except the government of India's own mid-year review of the economy, made the point that we were able to use this decline in oil prices to our advantage. Again, it's an episode that most people would have forgotten by now, but I'm saying that there's a sequence of steps that the government took at that time, all of which were targeted at ordinary people, at working people. And that reflects you might say, the class character, the policies of the government of India at that point in time. And there has been a consistency in these anti-people policies of the union government since then. Because when GST occurred, I think we need to look at a couple of things about GST. One, as I said already, it's an indirect tax. Therefore, it falls heavily on the poor as a share of their incomes and their consumption expenditures. For the rich, it's not so much of a burden because it's a very small part of their income. And also, since the very rich happen to also run industry and so on, they can transfer the impact of GST onto the customers. Secondly, this was a serious intrusion on the rights of state governments because the fact that only the GST Council could decide upon the rates of taxation of commodities, goods and services, except for 4 items. Only this GST Council could decide. That GST Council was one where the union government held all essentially the most important influence. It could decide what would be done. Although nominally a council would take the decision, it will basically be a decision imposed by the government of India. You know very well that the state governments now are reduced to a situation where they can only change tax rates on 4 commodities: petrol, diesel, tobacco, and alcohol. And beyond that, they have lost all the taxation powers. And this is very serious because, after all, Indian states are not merely administrative arrangements. Each Indian state is, generally speaking, linguistically homogeneous and unified and has emerged as a nationality in the course of the freedom struggle. In fact, the emergence of linguistic states, linguistic nationality states, was parallel to the development of all India nationality in the freedom struggle. And that's why when the constitution was designed, it explicitly allowed for the state governments to have important powers. And what demonetization followed by GST did is to essentially deliver very strong blows against any notion of autonomy of state governments, of states of the Indian Union. Although the constitution starts by saying that India is a union of states, de facto, the kinds of policies that the regime in power since 2014 has followed, states have been reduced to a much weaker status as independent entities within the framework of a union of nation state, of nationality. So again, the blow against the state autonomy should be understood. And one must think about it because you remember, you can take a state like Tamil Nadu. It's got about 80 million people, right? 8 crores or thereabouts. And this is the size of Germany or Great Britain or France. These are big countries, and each Indian state, some very small states may be there, but by and large, each Indian state is a very large entity in terms of both territory and population, and has a distinct set of characteristics historically inherited in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of its own traditions and literature and so on. So it is unfortunate that this whole identity of linguistic nationalities is being obliterated by imposing highly centralized apparatus on daily governance of life at the level of the state. This has now happened, of course, getting extended to other spheres like education, where the new education policy is an imposition on the states, the language formula, which is again an imposition. I could go on adding to the list. And the fact of the demonetization being followed by the GST meant a double whammy for the economy. So, in fact, this led to a situation where many small players, small producers, could not survive the impact of GST. Of course, there was another minor measure which I won't talk about much, but following closely on the heels of both demonetization and GST came the Cattle Trade Act, which was again another disaster. I won't go into it now. I think it's been discussed earlier, the Livestock Trade Act. So essentially, these years of 16 and 17, November 16 to the end of 17, this is a period of great destabilization of the economy and imposition of stagnation on the economy. And it was evident in the kind of trends in growth rates that the economy experienced subsequently. And when we came to 2019-20, India's GDP growth rate fell to a remarkable low of less than 4% to 3.9% or so in that year. And this was just on the eve of the pandemic. I want you to recall now, it's many years now, so you may not even remember, but 2019, October, when Indian big industry complained of being unable to sell goods and services. People talked about not being able to sell cars, for example, and the Honorable Finance Minister said, "Oh, why do you worry about that? Take Ola and Uber." This kind of the sound advice, quote unquote, sound advice came from the government. In fact, what happened was that the both the GST measure and the earlier demonetization measure had weakened growth impulses in the economy to a considerable extent, and they were important factors in the slowdown of the economy by the time you come to 2019-20. And the fact that economy slowed down in that year led to demands from industry saying we are facing these difficulties. And of course, unlike how the government responds to the demands of working people, peasants, workers, and so on, it responded with great urgency to the demands of the corporate sector and the capitalist class. Governed in late October, in late 2019, the finance minister actually reduced tax rates on corporate profits from 30% to just 22%. That was really, at that time, among the lowest tax rates across the world. It's like what Trump was trying to do in the US. We had one of the lowest tax rates. And by the finance minister's own admission, that at that point in time, this lowering of tax rates on the corporate sector from then existing rate of 30% plus surcharge and so on to 22% would result in an annual loss of tax revenue to the government of India of 1,45,000 crore rupees per year. And remember, when this tax loss occurs to the government of India via income tax, it also affects the states because the pool of divisible tax revenue that is shared with the states is the one that also declines once the huge loss in income tax is taken into account. And this in turn implies a decline in taxes that the states receive as part of the divisible pool. So, there are many implications which ordinary, in the course of our ordinary lives, we don't think about it, but these are important consequences for the union, the government of India, India as a whole, and for the states. And these are measures, one after the other, that delivered very serious blows. And by the time we came to 2019-20, prior to the pandemic, the Indian economy had slowed down considerably. GDP growth rate is one thing, but this slowdown in GDP growth rate is an additional point to the other facts which I pointed out earlier, which is that demonetization and GST cause huge burdens for ordinary working people, especially weakening the informal sector, which means, basically the peasants and the workers and the small players in the economy, small industry, medium and small MSMEs and so on. And that trend of attacking the informal sector and pandering to the interests of the large formal corporate players has continued since then. Now, of course, I've not even mentioned what is happening with the policies in the banking sector, which are very important, of which reference was made by previous speakers on how the banking sector policies of the government of India at the present moment especially are extremely dangerous. They are leading to a process of privatization of the banking sector, which will be extremely harmful to any notion of independent and autonomous development of the Indian economy. Once you open up your financial sector, not just to domestic private players, which is happening to a large extent now, but also to private foreign players in a world dominated by internationally mobile finance capital, allowing mobile finance capital from across the world to enter your economy, capture your banking sector assets and the financial sector assets is something that is fraught with grave danger, because this can be a very powerful weapon in the hands of global capitalist powers to bring India to its knees and to make India um, essentially accept that direction. So ordinary people may not even think about all these things when they get news of Bank A, Bank B being taken over, and currently there are a number of private banks are being taken over by foreign investors. That there is, we have of course already had this experience in Kerala. You have the federal banks experience, so on. There are many points I could just quote, but everywhere I know BEFI has stood up against this weakening of indigenous banking, of Indian banks. And I remember a time way back, even the earlier regimes also, when Indian nationalist Indian banks were being constantly talked down, saying that the crisis is around the corner, Indian bank will collapse, X bank or Y bank will collapse. But as it turned out, the only banks that are collapsing were private banks, not the nationalized banks. Now, government of India has found that it could not have its way as far as its attempts to reverse bank nationalization in various ways failed one after the other. They made a number of efforts. They continue to make efforts. What's happened to IDBI. Many private sector, banks which have big claims essentially came from public sector entities. Also, people forget that. ICICI and so on. So I think the experience since the bank nationalization in 1969 has shown that public sector banking has played a very crucial role in the growth of this country. And this has been a particular target of attack of the government that came into office in 2014. Not that the previous government was always consistent. There were also people in that government who wanted to um, either privatize the banking industry or break up public sector banks into more smaller entities and so on, or integrate them into two or three big banks. All these arbitrary actions with respect to the banking sector were being thought of without regard for the consequences for the sovereignty and self-reliance of the economy. And all this came to a head in the last 10 years of the present regime, where it has unleashed one attack after another on India's sovereignty as a power, economic sovereignty and its autonomy. Although currently it is being forced to take certain positions or postures seemingly defiant of US imperialism and Trump tariffs and so on, its voice is very muted. And I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of deal is announced in the coming days. So, there is a consistent track record of the Modi government of the last 10 years of attacking the ordinary people on the one hand, workers, farmers, and so on. On the other hand, kowtowing to big corporate interests, both domestic and foreign. And I think you should not see demonetization in isolation. It's part of a longer process, which is unfolding still in front of us, and which is, of course, mercifully resisted by people in various ways. That the government seems to be, continuing to commit its uh, policy framework to further the interests of corporate capital, both domestic and international. And I think that's a very, if you think about where we are today, um, if you look at the developments in the last 4, 5, 6 years, we can look at where was India at the time of the starting of the pandemic. It had been weakened by the policies of demonetization followed by GST, which greatly weakened the economy. In fact, the claims made for GST, I remember at that time the economic survey claimed that the GST would enable us to uh, increase growth rate by 1 or 2 percentage points. Completely absurd argument with no logic behind it. And of course, it didn't do that. And then what followed instead was a disruption in the economy. And then the slowdown in the economy that came in 2019-20, to which I've already referred. Now, what happened after that? After that, we had about 6 years, right? So what has happened after that? First, there was this complete, unwillingness to deal with the COVID emergency in the manner it should have been dealt with, because there was for the union government, priorities were somewhat different. There was this whole big Trump event in Ahmedabad that was to happen. Then there was this process of destabilization of the government of Madhya Pradesh, which at that time in Congress rule, and arrangements had to be made to depose the Congress and install BJP in power. So only after this Trump meeting agenda and the dismissal of the elimination of Congress from power in Madhya Pradesh took place. Only after that, quickly the union government woke up. I mean, as if it suddenly woke up and announced a countrywide lockdown with very little advance notice for people and with no arrangements for assisting migrant workers displaced far away from the homes uh, to reach their homes following the panic and the scare that the COVID implied. In fact, when you can see the different reactions, and the first case of COVID was identified in Kerala in January 20, late January, end of January 2020, that government took action immediately and did an excellent job of containing COVID in the state of Kerala. But the government of India took a couple of months to take the action. And when it took it, it was not a very carefully calculated or carefully evaluated decision. It was a blanket lockdown for the entire country, which again disrupted trade and commerce and the economy significantly. There were other ways of tackling it, which would have involved focusing on tracing and and vaccination. On vaccination, again, the government dilly-dallied, putting states in a very difficult position and making it difficult for them to deal with the consequences of COVID. We lost a lot of lives in 21, very tragically in 2021. I won't go into all that now, but I'm saying essentially that the manner in which the government handled the COVID disaster was again reflective of its distorted priorities, which privileged profit over people. And of course, we saw clearly at that time not only the nature of the Modi government, but also the nature of international capital, which is more concerned about making its profits from vaccines with saving people's lives. So, in a sense, what is at work is a larger economic system driven by profit, which does not value people's lives. And this is true for India, this is true for other countries pursuing this path of development. In contrast, the much maligned Chinese government managed to really greatly limit damage by COVID on their citizens through very strict policies. And I think there are lessons in this for us. But it's unlikely that the media that we have in this country, largely controlled by big business, is unlikely to let ordinary people look at these other experiences. And I think today, when 9 years after the disastrous demonetization experiment, we review policies of the government of India for almost a decade now, it is difficult to escape the conclusion that this government is characterized by a relentless pursuit of neoliberal policies in terms of privatization and opening up the Indian economy and deregulating on the one hand, but on the other hand, also at the same time introduces measures which further weaken national sovereignty. And I think currently what's happening in the banking sector, what's happening in the financial sector is something that we need to reflect carefully about, because control over finance of a country is the surest way for any power to exercise its influence in the country. And right now, if India's financial sector gets to a point where foreign finance capital has great influence over policies and actions of the government of India in that sphere, that is a very serious consequence. I won't go into individual cases. We have all been following these cases. IDBA is one example I mentioned earlier. There are other examples. We also know how this, while ordinary people and the informal sector were subjected to great difficulties by demonetization, followed by the arbitrary and very poorly designed GST. Ordinary people are greatly affected. The informal sector was affected, but the corporates were quite content with the regime and its generosity to the corporate sector, although they did complain about demand in 2019. Now, in the years since then, the pro-corporate character of the government of India has become even more evident in policy after policy. And at the same time, the claims of economic growth have proved to be quite spurious. Government of India has been claiming that it's the fastest growing economy in the world and so on. These are the claims which are neither here nor there. Even if GDP grew faster, it doesn't automatically ensure that the ordinary people get a better deal. Nothing great about GDP growth rates alone. But quite apart from that, it is also true that GDP growth rates have not been of the order that the government has been claiming. There are serious issues, the way it's calculated, and there's been much discussion on this. In fact, I remember the Arvind Subramanian was chief economic advisor and was writing the economic survey year after year. At that time, after he'd come out, he said India's growth rate is overstated by about 1 to 2 percentage points of GDP. One may or may not agree with him, but I'm saying there are all these questions that have been raised over the reported rates of growth of GDP as a measure that is, sought to be projected as an achievement of the government of India. So what I'm saying is that there's been a series of disruptive measures by the government of India over the last decade or so. And in the process, additionally, of course, you can't blame COVID on the government of India, but you can certainly take issue with the manner in which the government of India has handled COVID. And we've seen that the government of India's handling of COVID resulted in a huge number of avoidable deaths and other negative consequences. Although it was a very difficult challenge, I would agree that it was. But other countries have also handled it, and we didn't come out looking splendid the way the government of India dealt with the COVID pandemic. I remember their reluctance to help states in that period of crisis. States were being forced to borrow at high rates of interest in the market, while in fact government of India appropriated all the surpluses of RBI for itself. And that's, of course, something that's gone on. So, the continuing feature of the union government's policy in the last decade has been the centralization of economic powers and revenues to the union government, and making states far more dependent on the union government, and thereby trying to influence state government policies using these financial levers. At the same time, you've seen, or you are seeing, the response of the government of India to the disruptions caused by Donald Trump over the last year or so, and how differently other countries have dealt with it. For example, how does Lula and Brazil deal with Trump's aggressive tariff policies as opposed to a country like India, which is, big in size and not an unimportant player. And all this is reflective of a position that doesn't foreground, that doesn't put as most important economic self-reliance, scientific and technological self-reliance, but it instead exposes the Indian economy to pressures of Western capitalist powers primarily. And I think it's something that we need to take to the people, going beyond the banking sector, look at the overall macroeconomic policies and how they hurt ordinary working people. And of course, you have inspiring examples that this can be done. For example, the people don't realize how historic the struggle of the farmers was against the 3 anti-farmer laws that were passed in 2020, and the farmers really fought back in a very big way. And at the time that they started the agitation across the country, not many of us would have thought that they would actually succeed, because this is, you're confronting a very powerful government. Yet farmers showed that by promoting unity among their ranks and fighting with determination for their cause, they were ultimately able to make a seemingly invincible, seemingly very powerful union government throughout the laws it had passed, and accept the farmers' contention that these are not in the interest of the farming community. It's true that currently government of India is trying to bring back those laws in other forms. And that effort will continue because the government of India represents the interests not of the Indian people, but of the big capitalists and landlords of this country and of foreign capital increasingly. And I think I know I've gone beyond my remit of discussing demonetization because you can't discuss only demonetization, which is a very important event, but it's a one-off event. And I think what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is the continuity of policies from 2014 onwards till now. Of course, there are some continuity of policies with the earlier regimes also, because once India moved on a path of neoliberal policies in 1991, uh, and especially when it intensified them through the 90s and the early 2000s. There was only one interlude in this whole period of 1991 to 2025 when the government of India was forced to respond to people in some limited measure. I'm referring to the period 2004-2008, when the government of India at the center had to depend on the support of left parties. And therefore, we could push through things like Right to Information Act, things like Right to Education Act, things like what eventually became the National Food Security Act, uh, the very important National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, the Tribal and Forest Rights Act, many pro-people legislations at the union level, plus, of course, the impetus to agriculture through public funding, greater public investment by government in agriculture-related infrastructure, extension services, and so on. Likewise, in some other sectors where government support was useful, these are all achieved by by the combined work of the left parties and progressive civil society organizations. Of course, also assisted by the judiciary in that period between 2004 and 6, 4 and 8. But for that window of 2004 to 8, neoliberal policies have been almost unchecked entirely and in place for over 20 years. And we are now living through the consequences of these disastrous neoliberal policies. And I think demonetization must be seen as one element, because demonetization is not necessarily part of any neoliberal agenda. But in our country, this is used also as an instrument of weakening the people's resistance and weakening the powers of state governments. And I think it's a good point in time today to reflect on what kind of changes in policies that we should be asking and fighting for. I mean, you just recall the fact that while people are going through all these harrowing experiences, government is offering concession after concession for the corporate sector. Also, it is offering to the corporate sector very lenient and preferential treatment in respect of the debts of the corporate sector to the Indian banking system, and particularly to the public sector banking system. So it's not something that one can take lightly, the fact that the write-off of debts of very large order, while denying access to farmers to finance. Farmers and small businessmen, MSMEs, they have very great difficulties in accessing finance, but government of India is going to write off hundreds of thousands of crores owed by real big players. These are see, we need not fight shy of confronting the anti-people consequences of government's policies, because they don't feel shy at all in imposing anti-people policies on us. And I think that an organization like, fighting organization like BEFI, I'm sure, will take this fight forward in cooperation with other progressive and democratic forces in the days, months, and years to come. And I'm very grateful to the BEFI for the opportunity given to me to share some of my views over the last of economic policy over the last 10 years, taking off from the fact that we are recalling the disastrous act of demonetization undertaken 9 years ago by the Modi government. The people did make their feelings well known in the last elections, but somehow the government has managed to get back thanks to other players, political players who are not consistent in defending the interests of Indian people. But I'm glad that organizations like BIFI continue to stand their ground and fight not just for the cause of the bank employees, but also for the cause of the people of India. And I think that the inspiration provided to us, not just by our own strength, but by the heroic struggle of the Indian peasantry. Likewise, the resistance being put up by the trade union movement against the anti-labor laws that the government of India is trying to bring, the fight put up by the banking industry unions against the privatization of banking and against the handing over of Indian banks to foreign capital. All these are, inspiring and encouraging signs of resistance of ordinary people to the anti-people policies of the government of India. And I hope that these actions, as well as the effort of states to regain some degree of policy space and some degree of autonomy vis-a-vis the Indian government, in line with the with what the Constitution prescribes. I hope these efforts go forward, get strengthened, and we are able to prevent Union government from pursuing utterly disastrous and anti-people policies. Thank you.
Yes, sir, very, very thank you. Actually, the last 43 minutes was really a wonderful time as far as Bank Employees Federation of India is considered. See the call given by you while concluding. You have mentioned about the strike of the peasants, of the farmers in the country.
Yeah.
Really, you have your words, it inspired us. Yes, all of you might have noted how the neoliberal policy, the impact of neoliberal policy, how it affected the economy of our country. And for the last 10 years, how it affected, how it ordinary people were affected and how corporates gained. Then the real picture of economic growth, how government of India handled the pandemic situation. Not only that, the Trump's aggressive measures and how it was dealt by other countries. Everything it was explained. So, sir, anyhow, I once again say that you have given us a very valuable points for our future programs, for our future functioning. The word he has used, that is the attack to the economic sovereignty of this country. Sovereignty to this country for the past 10 years. Everything will be in our mind while we are moving with our trade union activities. Anyhow, for delivering official vote of thanks, I request the Secretary Bank Employees Federation of India, Comrade Hari Rao, to deliver the vote of thanks officially. Comrade Hari Rao, please.
Thank you, Comrade. That's right. PFI is conducting this webinar on demonetization, observing it as war against the poor and unknown sector of this country. Even after 9 years of demonetization, still we are remembering the horrors of this demonetization policies. The government has claimed that it is a war against terrorism, but right from demonetization, we have seen terrorist attacks right from Pulwama to Pahalgam. The other claim of the government is to eradicate black money, but since the day of demonetization, within 4 days, the Ahmedabad District Cooperative Banks has exchanged 745 crores of black money to white money. Subsequently, within 4 days, RBI has to intervene and it has stopped all DCCBs to accept exchange of currencies. Incidentally, the Ahmedabad District Cooperative Bank, which had its chairman, none other than Amit Shah, was also a long-standing director of that Ahmedabad District Cooperative Bank. And the person who was in charge of monitoring that demonetization is the face of that project is none other than Shaktikanta Das, who was the Economic Affairs Secretary at the time, who was later was rightly awarded by the BJP government as governor of RBI. So these are all the things happened during the demonetization. And in his introductory remark, our General Secretary Jagdish Basu Chaudhary has clearly outlined the ill effects of demonetization our President, Comrade S.S. Sunil, who has presided over webinar, also clearly explained how the demonetization exercise has affected this country. The special speaker of this session our dear Professor Dr. Venkatesh Atreya, in his own style, has explained not only demonetization effects, but also later the ill effects of GST, the anti-people, pro-corporate policies of this government in reducing the corporate tax from 30% to 22%, and also the international capital's involvement in the banking sector, and also the farmer strike, and he has given a broad picture of the international level economic policies also which is affecting this country, and he has given a right direction to BFI. And I thank him on behalf of Bank of Federation of India. I thank Dr. Professor Atreya for giving this beautiful lecture. And I'll be failing my part if I don't thank our Kerala BFI comrades for arranging this Zoom platform to conduct this webinar. And lastly, I thank all comrades who have participated in this webinar and made it a grand success. And on behalf of BFI, I once again thank one and all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
May
Okay.
I exit now, Debashish?
Yeah, definitely. Sir, once again, our sincere thanks to you, because I know that you are now in Trivandrum for attending some other programs, and you have spent your
Yes.
valuable time with us.
Yeah,
Once
I'm
again,
at
thank
an
you.
international conference, but I took time off to spend some time
Okay.
with you. It's always a pleasure to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks a lot.
colleagues
Thanks a
with
lot.
Biffy. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Bye.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Good night.
Yeah, good night.